I experienced something that I thought I couldn't tell anyone about for a long time, because what I saw beyond our mortal existence is literally shocking. 8 years after that incredible incident, I finally decided to share my experiences. First, I told my wife everything, and to my surprise, it didn't cause her to feel distrust or amusement. On the contrary, she was very interested and began to ask in detail about what actually happened to me, in a place where living people are not allowed to go. That's how the confession of the ambulance doctor Nikolai Patsvirov began. He had worked in intensive care for many years and then found himself in a situation where doctors had to save his life. Nikolai admitted that he had not previously been interested in whether patients have posthumous visions or not. But when he personally visited the afterlife, he began to treat everything completely differently. It happened like this. In the summer of 1978, Nikolai Patsvirov, who at that time was 50 years old, suddenly had a heart attack during a workday. The events that followed completely turned his life upside down. By his own admission, the most shocking thing for him was the fact that even after his heart stopped, he continued to live. But it was a completely different form of life, unfamiliar to him. The last thought before he lost consciousness was about his teenage son, how he would now be without a father. And then came oblivion, but not for long. Very quickly, he regained awareness. And this return was not at all what he expected. Something incredible was happening to him, something that in no way fit his atheistic worldview. Nikolai thought that after a heart attack, he would wake up in a hospital ward, at worst in intensive care. But instead, he realized that he was flying through some kind of dark tunnel, and it seemed to him he was moving along it at enormous and increasing speed. This, on one hand, horrified him, and on the other, miraculously gave him a feeling of freedom. This is how he described it. I was flying so fast that I couldn't see anything around me through the darkness. Then I flew into the light. It was so bright I couldn't look at it. Soon, it stopped blinding me, and I was able to look around. Only then did I see myself, not in a hospital ward, but in some strange place. Its walls emitted a pleasant white light. Then I discovered that my vision had become different, not like it was in life. Wherever I looked, I somehow, miraculously, saw everything that was happening around me. I could even see through opaque objects, but the most amazing thing, I couldn't see myself at all. I had no idea how I now looked. Then the doctor said that in that state, he did not hear people around him, but somehow knew what they were thinking. He had discovered the ability to read thoughts. At that moment, he was worried about his family and thought of his house, and then, in an instant, found himself there. He saw his wife and naturally tried to tell her everything that was happening to him. He stood in front of her and passionately spoke of his experiences, but she didn't see him. At some point, she even passed through him. That's when the doctor realized he had no way to contact her. Then he went through something he remembered with a shudder, something he later called his personal purgatory. When I was outside my body, my whole life flashed before me, starting from the cradle. I saw everything through the lens of guilt before my neighbors. And these are not just words. The feeling of shame brought tears of remorse. No matter how much I tried to convince myself there was nothing to be ashamed of, it didn't work. It turns out you can't deceive your own soul. When Nikolai remembered each of his misdeeds as a child, bitterly regretting them, it was as if a strong wind picked him up and threw him back into the dark tunnel. He spent some time there, feeling the speed of his flight slow down as he moved farther and farther from the light. And then he literally fell back into his own body. According to him, returning to it was extremely unpleasant. It felt cold, sticky, and uncomfortable. From that moment on, Patsvirov promised himself he would one day tell people about what he had experienced, to help them realize not only that life after death exists, but that much of it depends on how we behave here in our material world. Nikolai also confessed, "After I had the chance to visit the other side of our mortal existence, I can't stand it when people say that no one has ever returned from there. But I, and others like me, are vivid examples. We returned, so to say otherwise is the height of stupidity. I want to ask these smart people, how were we supposed to return? As living corpses? Alas, that's foolish. The point isn't evidence. It's their desire to deny everything. But for those who have ears to hear, I'm telling you about my unique experience of being in the other world." Another person who returned from the other world was the outstanding physicist Vladimir Efremov. He personally took part in launching Gagarin into space and was involved in spacecraft development. His reputation in the scientific community was impeccable, yet at the risk of losing his career, he once also had the chance to visit the next world and return with a message. Once, while visiting his sister, he had a severe coughing fit from chronic bronchitis. It became hard for him to breathe, his body weakened, and he lost consciousness. His heart stopped. At the moment when he realized his life was ending, he suddenly felt a pleasant weightlessness. The most surprising thing was that his consciousness continued to function. Later, he compared his state to a childlike serenity, or the feeling of flying in a dream. Like many others in a similar situation, he flew through a tunnel toward a bright light. He didn't feel his body, but was aware of everything around him. He felt no fear or anxiety. Efremov described it like this: "Everything around was fresh and interesting. My consciousness embraced everything at once. Time and distance didn't exist. The space was like a folded cylinder, with even light everywhere, casting no shadows. I saw heterogeneous structures, relief-like, but I couldn't tell where was up or down. And I thought, if I can think, it means I continue to exist." While in the tunnel, he realized he knew everything about the world he had just left, as if he had gone beyond all earthly knowledge. His memory merged with the entire universe and felt bottomless. He noted that the afterlife is not limited to 3 dimensions, but many more. He said, "My interaction with the surrounding environment gradually lost its one-sided nature. For any mental question I formed, an answer immediately appeared out of nowhere, like lightning." He also observed that all processes in the afterlife occur not linearly, as on Earth, but simultaneously and in all directions. All objects are presented as informational blocks. The most incredible part happened later when he calmed down and began to study the space he found himself in. Then Efremov noticed something that forever changed his view of reality. "I realized I was being guided by someone omnipresent, boundless, an invisible but tangible being who did everything not to scare me. I felt a spiritual connection with him. I don't know whether it was a guardian angel, a guide in the afterlife, or the Lord himself, or perhaps his emanation. But I was convinced someone meets us there and takes care of us." It's true that Efremov experienced unpleasant sensations during his journey. He felt as though something was holding him back from moving further into the higher realms. Something was dragging him back, like roots pulling a plant from the ground. Then he returned to his body. His first words stunned his sister. "There is no end. There is life there too, but it is not like here." In the 7 minutes that passed on Earth, the scientist experienced an incredible spiritual journey. His soul visited the afterlife, where secrets were revealed that people usually cannot comprehend. After he recovered, he told his family that death no longer scared him. It was just a door to another space. Here's what neurologist Georgy Rodonaia said about his own experience beyond. "What I discovered beyond the line of our mortal existence will not leave anyone indifferent. And it doesn't matter whether you are an atheist or a believer. Everything is not as we are told." Believe me, I know what I'm talking about, because I not only visited the horizon of life, I returned from there. The experience of clinical death of Georgy Rodonaia amazes the imagination, since it is considered one of the longest in the world. It lasted for several days, and the doctor returned from the other world already being in the morgue. It all began in 1976, when he was hit by a car. In intensive care, he was taken in extremely serious condition, and alas, the doctors were unable to save him. But when the specialists delivered their sad verdict, death, for Georgy Rodonaia himself, it was not the end of existence, but the beginning of a journey into otherworldly space. Here is what he himself told about it. "I saw what was happening as if from the outside. In my head, only one thought was spinning. How can I be when I am not there? And then I realized the full horror of my situation." But then, even more shocking events happened to Georgy Rodonaia. His soul seemed to be picked up by an invisible wind, and the most terrible period of his otherworldly wandering began. Everything suddenly darkened, and it seemed to him that he fell asleep. But it was not so. He did not sleep, and the darkness around his consciousness became thicker and denser. Georgy Rodonaia recalled these experiences. "Even though I found myself in pitch darkness, I still did not feel my body, did not feel any physical pain, but I still understood that it was me, and that there was absolute darkness around me. It seemed to me that it was pressing on me. I was not ready for this, but gradually I pulled myself together and began to think what was really happening. But nothing pleasant or calming came to mind. I kept asking myself why I ended up in the darkness, what to do, while it was only clear that I was still alive, although I was obviously in another dimension. Then, like an epiphany, the thought came to him that in addition to darkness, there is light. Thinking about light, he noticed that the darkness around was beginning to dissipate. Soon, all around him, there was a blinding white light that was so bright that Georgy Rodonaia compared it to a continuous flash of a camera. But gradually, he got used to the blinding light and felt how a calming warmth and comfort emanated from it. Georgy Rodonaia described further as follows: "Having gotten used to the bright light, I began to look around. Now I noticed that the space around me consisted of tiny particles that we call molecules and atoms. At first, it seemed to me that there was no order in the movement of these particles. But then, I saw that this chaos was beautiful in its symmetry." Georgy Rodonaia said that at that moment, before his eyes appeared the all-encompassing form of all living things. Admiring this beauty, he felt that anxiety about his current situation completely disappeared. He also stopped worrying about his body and the further existence of his own soul. all restrictions on the perception of life after death disappeared. Then another glow appeared, a certain golden disk resembling the sun. Its light began to penetrate into the consciousness of Georgy Rodonaia. He felt himself a part of this light and experienced, one after another, waves of indescribable ecstasy. Now it seemed to him that everything that happened came with a regularity of logic and deep correctness. The presence of an otherworldly space in the best possible way endowed life with meaning. Now everything fell into place. Endless evolution and spiritual development really exist. Now it became clear to him why. Georgy Rodonaia remembered his whole life, which appeared before him entirely, from beginning to end. He felt himself both an audience and a participant in this life. He compared this vision with a hologram in which everything existed at the same time, from the moment of birth to the sad ending on the operating table in intensive care. Georgy Rodonaia realized that life is everywhere, and it is endless. Only the forms of its manifestation change, but the essence of existence never ends. All being is interconnected and one, and it would seem that the otherworldly adventure of Georgy Rodonaia should have ended there. But it was not so. In his posthumous fate, there was another turn. And this time, it was so shocking that, by his own admission, he could not remember it for a long time without shuddering. The fact is that while his soul was in other spheres and he was busy researching the afterlife, his body had already been brought to the pathologist for an autopsy. A specialist in the morgue made a longitudinal incision on the corpse to open the chest. And at that moment, Georgy Rodonaia opened his eyes. The doctor, at first, did not attach much importance to this, believing that it was just a reflex, and therefore closed his eyes again. But he opened them again. Then, frozen with horror, the medic brought a lamp to his face and noticed with amazement that the pupils reacted to light. Then the doctor urgently delivered Georgy Rodonaia to intensive care. Everyone understood that this could not be, because too much time had passed since the moment of death. And nevertheless, the one who could already be considered a corpse suddenly showed signs of life. At the moment when the doctors in intensive care were returning Georgy Rodonaia to life, his soul felt as if some force grabbed it and rudely, unceremoniously, pushed it down into the abyss of darkness and terrible pain. After some time, he woke up in his own body. Upon returning from the other world, Georgy Rodonaia told about his incredible experience the following: "The afterlife for each of us will be a continuation of the soul. Scoundrels and villains will end up only in the darkest areas of the other world, and bright, kind souls will continue their endless existence in the higher spheres of being."